Well, I hope you all had a happy 4th of July, which marks our Independence Day. I'm sure that many of you gathered with some friends for a barbecue. The weather, although a little bit iffy, seemed to clear for the fireworks and so on. But I really do hope that you took some time yesterday to reflect upon the founding of our country and why it was founded. ABC News ran a poll recently, and they just polled teenagers. And the poll reported that 14% of teenagers thought that we declared independence from France. 5% thought we rebelled against the tyrannous Canadians. 15% did not know that there were 13 colonies. And 9% did not know that the 4th of July was the day the Declaration of Independence was signed, let alone that America had already been at war for almost a year with the battles of Bunker Hill and Lexington and Concord fought. Well, those are teenagers, but I wonder how many adults do not know the same. And they talk about 4th of July, fireworks, freedom, and so on. But if we forget the history, we are doomed to repeat. And so we ought to think that back on July the 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed by our founding fathers. When they did so, in one sense, they committed a great act of treason. In another sense, they took a leap of faith. Ponder the words of that document written by Thomas Jefferson, that graduate from the great college of William and Mary. He makes 4 references to God as the lawmaker, the creator, the supreme judge, and the protector. The most famous statement is perhaps this: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." The argument for independence rested upon really a dependence on God, that God is the creator, He is the source of truth and thereby justice, that God has created us in His image and likeness and thereby has endowed us with inalienable rights. These rights, though, are self-evident. So the founding fathers were looking to what even Aristotle, what our church calls the natural law. That law that is written upon the human heart that any human being using reason can know. God is of reason, and therefore God really is the author of this natural law. But any human being, whether believer or not, can know these basic principles. For instance, take the 10 Commandments. Any reasonable human being, even an atheist, would have to admit that the last 7 of those commandments make sense. To respect legitimate authority, particularly that in a family of mom and dad, that one should not kill, commit adultery, steal, bear false witness, covet. They make sense. So they do not have to necessarily be revealed by God to Moses and the 10 Commandments. Any human being can know those truths. And so, given this basis, our founding fathers said King George in Parliament had violated God's law. And therefore, we had the right to declare our independence from Britain and declare our dependence upon God's truth and justice. And so, we consider then that this is the foundation. Our forefathers, though, these founding fathers, nevertheless knew the importance of God. Just consider some brief statements from the first 4 presidents of our country. George Washington said, "It is the duty of all nations to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God, to obey His will, to be grateful for His benefits, and humbly to implore His protection and favor." John Adams, Our Constitution was made only for moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Thomas Jefferson. And can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are a gift from God? James Madison. Before any man can be considered as a member of civil society, he must be considered as a subject of the governor of the universe. Yes, a firm conviction that in the founding of our country, our beliefs in life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, what we call these inalienable rights, were based on God's truth and God's justice. Granted, it's always been a struggle, though, because at times our country rebelled. Just like we hear in the first passage from Ezekiel. Ezekiel is sent to the rebellious house of Israel. This Israel that had been given so much and yet broke the commandments, forgot the covenant, even turned to the worship of false gods. Yes, the rebellious house of Israel. And God says to Ezekiel, go to those obstinate hearts and bring about a conversion. My brothers and sisters, in the history of our country, Christians have always been called to play the role of the prophet, to address the times when our country, this house, has rebelled against God, has had an obstinate heart, and to bring them back to God's truth and justice. For instance, we know that at one time in our country we had slavery. And the Supreme Court in 1857 ruled that a slave was a non-person, a piece of property. And yet Christians fought against that mentality, speaking that this violated the natural law, that every person has human dignity. When Abraham Lincoln spoke about slavery and its evils, he used the natural law as the basis. Then after the Civil War came segregation. Again, 1896, in Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court ruled that separate but equal is constitutional. And so we had segregation right here in Loudoun County, constitutional. Yet Christians continued to speak and say, no, this violated the dignity of the human person. Some of those great leaders we know were Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And when he wrote from that great letter from the Birmingham jail, he invoked the natural law and he referenced St. Thomas Aquinas. And then we continue on. And we know in 1973 the Supreme Court ruled in Roe versus Wade that the unborn child is a non-person, has no rights, is not a person until birth. And yet, any reasonable human being ought to say, that is absurd. Through reason, we know. Science tells us we have a DNA at conception. You and I are the same person that was conceived. All that's been added is growth, time, birth. Now with modern technology, a child who's born prematurely at 5 months can still be cared for in a neonatal care unit. Or a child in utero can have surgery to correct a problem. 3D imaging can show in a sonogram a living child in the womb. And yet, so unreasonably we say, that child is not a person. So Christians continue to say, yes, the child, the unborn child, has dignity. That child is a person, and the fight continues on. Well, now, just about a week ago, the Supreme Court ruled that marriage is no longer between a man and a woman, but now can be two men, two women. And the bishops of Virginia, our bishop, Bishop Laverty, Bishop DiLorenzo of Richmond, again said, as I read last weekend, we are deeply distressed by this decision which fails to uphold marriage as the union which united one man and one woman, This fundamental institution grounded in natural law predates any religion or nation. It makes sense. And so, my brothers and sisters, we're in for a fight. We're called to be the prophets, to speak the truth. But we have to, because, as Aristotle said in referring to natural law, the slightest deviation from the truth leads to a multitude of errors, which lead to destruction. Consider this. This past week, already a man in Montana filed a lawsuit asking to legitimize polygamy. Why not? If we look at the Supreme Court's decision, which was based on sentiment rather than jurisprudence, why not? Or we now see how people can decide who they want to be. You can look in a mirror and see that you're a boy, but say, no, I'm really a girl today. And that's now legal. Fairfax County will start teaching this to 7th graders beginning next year. And who can say, why not? But then why not? A person can say, as a lady did, I'm really black. She worked for the NAACP. She's white as I am, and she said, no, I'm black. Who's to say she's wrong if we can decide who I want to be? Or a woman in Sweden, you can Google this one, she's decided she's a cat. She dresses like a cat. She thinks she's a cat. She wants to be a cat. How absurd. I remember when I was a little boy, I wanted to be an American Indian. I had the outfit, the tomahawk, the bow and arrow, the headdress, the teepee. And I said to my mom, are we American Indians? And my mom said, honey, your great-grandparents came over from Austria and Germany. There's no way we have any American Indian blood in us. So be it. Now, am I going to say I'm Big Chief Saunders here today? No. Reality is reality, but my brothers and sisters, you and I have entered the theater of the absurd, and we're all watching a production of the Emperor's New Clothes around us. Don't be deceived. You and I have to play the prophet and speak the truth. Abraham Lincoln said, America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves. So, the challenge for us is, as Christians, to take on that role of the prophet, to speak the truth, to go to the obstinate of heart, to the rebellious house in America right now, and speak the truth. Will it be easy? No. We heard in our gospel today, Jesus was rejected. Ezekiel was rejected. St. Paul was rejected. And St. Paul says, though, that I am content with weakness, insults, hardships, persecution, and constraints for Christ. But he also said, the Lord said to him, my grace will sustain you. My grace will be sufficient for you. Yes, we may be a smaller church one day, and we may just be a small, faithful remnant, just like the house of Israel was at one point. But so be it. The truth will carry on. And when the collapse comes, and error always brings destruction and collapse, it will be the church that rebuilds. Just as when the barbarians invaded the Roman Empire, the church saved Western civilization. The challenge then is, are you prepared to take on that role of the prophet? Real Christians always have. Real Christians have always been able to speak the truth with courage and conviction. Real Christians know that it's only in Jesus Christ that we have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So let us, therefore, take this time, this holiday weekend, to declare our dependence upon God and our independence from the political, ideological tyranny we face this day. Yes, to declare our dependence upon our God, who has given us so much, who's blessed our country with so much, and is the one who sustains true life true liberty, true happiness. May God bless you.